I realize everybody's eating, but we want to have a real special session during lunch today. As some of you, even many of you, should know, the Alice Training Institute sponsors an award every year along with the National Association of School Resource Officers, and that award is the Jake Riker Award. And in 1998, Jake Riker, a 17-year-old student himself at the time at Thurston High School up in Springfield, Oregon, took down a shooter in his cafeteria. Young man at that time was shot twice in the process, survived, and to this day has become a good friend to many of us, and went in the military, just an exceptional human. And so we honor him through this award. And each year, both our national training team and the executive board of NASRO votes on submissions from all of the school resource officers around the country of incidents that occurred in their schools, whatever emergency nature, where either a student or a staff member engaged in some form of activity that created a much better outcome than possibly it could have. This year's winners by unanimous vote of all the voters was the student and staff body of West Liberty-Salem schools in Ohio. We've been very blessed to have the involved group with us here today. I'm going to call them up one at a time, and then they're going to do just kind of a discussion format of explaining what happened that day and what led to not a completely perfect outcome, but dang near as close as we could get. First, I'd like to bring up Superintendent Craig Hissong. Principal Greg Johnson. Assistant Principal Andy McGill. And a young man who, up until today, I never had the pleasure to meet. Thankfully, the only casualty that day, a young man who was wounded and shot. He's now on a road to looks like a pretty dang good recovery. We're very proud to have with us Logan Cole.
I want to thank you all for having us here today, especially to Lisa and Greg, who invited us to come today and share with you guys a little bit of our story. And that's what we're going to do. I also want to extend a thank you to all of you in this room because of the work that you're doing. Alice had a major impact on our day that day, and because of it, I think that we had a much more successful situation than we might have had otherwise. The training that we had, even though not all of our circumstances were perfect, which I think is the way that most of these crisis situations carry out, we were able to make decisions based off of the knowledge that we had that we learned through that training. And it's been an effective thing. I am the Superintendent Craig Hissong, and just to give you a brief overview, our school district is 1,200 students basically. We're fairly rural, and it's in some ways I think it's an area that you wouldn't expect necessarily to have a school shooting. We have a pretty nice community, and I'm very proud of that community. And so an event like this isn't something that's always on your radar. I'm going to say maybe 6 years ago, was when I first heard of Alice, and I think my reaction at first to Alice was similar to probably a lot of school administrators, because there's this crazy concept of escaping and doing some things, giving power to your students and your teachers to make their own decisions. And at first, that's a scary concept because in schools, we like to kind of keep things organized and everybody knows what the plan is. And so that was a tough thing to break through. And I know talking with Greg and Lisa, that was definitely a challenge at the beginning years of Alice, was trying to get this whole concept off the ground. Fortunately, you persisted, because it wasn't too long after that we had our first Alice training in our district. That was about 4 years ago. And that was the only full training that we had before this incident occurred. We had some other kind of update trainings, but not full-scale trainings. But that training alone and the results we saw from that were amazing, and is one reason why we're here today, because it definitely it did have a huge impact on our school. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Greg Johnson. And Greg is our high school principal and was one of the first people on the scene that day. And he's going to basically kind of just run you through what happened. And so you can kind of see how it played out in our district and what it looked like to implement Alice, because it truly happened. One other thing I want you to keep in mind is that, and I got this from listening to Dan this morning in our session, some of the changes that have happened, because he talked about the fact that how the 911 calls went, they weren't very efficient or anything. That was 5 years prior to our incident. And when you flash forward to 2017 and the training that we had from Alice, the first person to call 911 in our school was a kid running through a field. And that's powerful, because it did shift the power to the students and the staff. It was no longer the principal making that phone call or the office staff. As Dan pointed out, time is of the essence, so every second counted. And we've looked at that situation and we've thought to ourselves, how much more could have happened if those phone calls hadn't been made by those students. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Greg, and thank you.
Great. Thank you. Again, my name is Greg Johnson. I'm the high school principal at West Liberty-Salem, and to follow up on a little of what Craig shared, just to give you a little more information about our district. Like you said, about 1,200 students, and we're one building, K through 12. Everybody's in one building, a single-story building. We're right along just a two-lane highway. It's US Route 68, and when the kids joke about going to school in the middle of a cornfield, it's 100% true. Our closest neighbors, houses and farms, are anywhere from 1/3 to 3/4 to a mile away. So we're in the middle of a cornfield. We graduate about 80 to 90, a big class of 100 kids a year, and everybody's in the same building from kindergarten through 12th grade. Last year was my 20th year with the district, my 12th year as the principal. And in that building, just my personal situation. My wife's teaching 4th grade down the hallway. I've got 3 children last year, one a sophomore, one a 7th grader, and one a 4th grader. So, the whole family goes to work, same place. And I've always said that's a great thing, that we can all go to work. Obviously, we never go in the same car, because that'd be too easy. But I've always said it's a great thing to all go to work at the same place. On that day, that made it... added another element of challenge to the day, knowing that the whole family's in the building. So that gives you just a little background about our school and where we're located. To give you an understanding of the day, first we'll start out by saying that we had a student who decided to, in a calculated way, bring a weapon into the school that morning. To set the stage, he was in the restroom with the weapon, preparing for whatever his plan was. I don't know what his plan was, but preparing. The bell rings at 7:35 to start the day in the high school, middle school, and the bell rang. People went to class. I was standing there at the secretary's desk. We were trying to figure out a couple things for the day. Most importantly, we had several teachers that had called in sick, and we were about 2 subs short. So we had teachers covering, but just trying to figure out what the day was going to be like. So as I'm standing there, about a minute after the bell rings, we've got a mock trial team getting ready to leave for a competition. And Logan's a member of the mock trial team. So they're kind of standing in the hall waiting on their teacher. He was going to get class started and then turn it over to the sub. And Logan, we'll share a little bit more of his experience. But Logan walked into the restroom to check his hair, which it does look great today. And just one of those things. He walked in the restroom around the corner and, in my opinion, surprised the other student. The other student's name was Eli. Surprised Eli. And Eli immediately pulled the trigger twice. And so those were the 2 gunshots that students in the hallway heard. And even though we had an Alice training where we actually had a deputy who trained us who fired a shotgun in the hallways with blanks so we could hear it, you know, it sounded different to a lot of people. It was in the restroom. You know, students immediately turned to look like, you know, what was that noise? The teacher from across the hall, who was Logan's mock trial advisor, Mr. Thomas, you know, he came out and thought, you know, what was that? That was probably a firecracker. That was something in the bathroom. I'm going to figure out what it was. Other people, from talking to him, we were still in the middle of a construction project, so other people were thinking, it's probably construction noise. Those workers are always dropping doors and doing other things. So there was some alarm, but there was still, you know, what was that? So Mr. Thomas goes in as soon as he gets inside the restroom, and like a lot of schools, it's one of those restrooms with no door. It just has kind of that privacy wall. So he walks around the wall and sees Logan laying there on the ground. And as he's looking at Logan out of the corner of his eye, he sees somebody else, and he turns and looks, and there's a student pointing a shotgun at him. So he gets out of there as soon as he can. And as he comes out into the hallway, the students are all out of the hallway, but there are 3 or 4 other teachers who were in the hall who heard the noise and were coming too. And Mr. Thomas did a great job. He immediately said, "Shooter, shooter, we have a shooter," and everybody scattered. Mr. Thomas got into his classroom, pulled the door shut just before Eli stepped to the doorway of the restroom and fired into his door twice, and fired into the neighboring teacher's door once. So by that time now we've had 5 gunshots, and Mr. Thomas has alerted everybody in the hallway that we've got an active shooter. And from that point on, our students and our teachers were just amazing. Again, I don't know what's happened yet. I'm down in the office. I haven't heard a thing. Immediately, we have a student on the phone calling 911. So the 911 operator knows about it before the principal. We had students barricading doors, opening windows, evacuating through the window. We had one teacher in that wing who thought, I'm going to call the office. And probably the main reason is because his wife was the elementary secretary. So he hit her extension as they were evacuating through the window and called the office. And as we've talked about it, you know, who knows how things could have been different if that call wasn't made. So he calls the office and says, she picks up, he says, active shooter in the high school wing. And I was standing there next to her, and you know, she answers the phone. She said, "What?" And then she turned and looked at us and said, "Andy says there's an active shooter in the high school wing. What do we do?" So she hung up the phone. I had the high school secretary who was sitting there next to me. I said, "You need to make an all call. Active shooter in the high school wing." Exactly like that's all we know right now. Active shooter in the high school wing. So I grabbed my radio and started running down the hallway. Just towards the high school wing, because that's where something's going on. As I got to the end of the hallway, I saw...
That's the only thing that he wasn't probably supposed to do, but
Probably not. Probably not. As I'm running down to the hallway, I see 2 construction workers headed that way, and I thought, yeah, they probably screwed something up. And so in my mind, I'm still thinking, hopefully this is a false alarm. Hopefully somebody heard something that sounded like a gunshot, but hopefully that's not what it is. When I got to the end of the wing, I just remember it was silent, which is amazing because students were still leaving windows, but in many cases, most of the students were gone. And just while we're talking about that evacuation, in our high school and middle school, we had 160 students that stayed in the building and 360 students that evacuated the building. So we're not talking about just those 2 or 3 classrooms. So I hit the hallway, and it's empty, and I saw a backpack. Logan's backpack, I find out later, was leaned up against the wall right outside the restroom. So that's the first thing that caught my attention, because it's the only thing in the hallway. The hallway's empty. And as I looked at the backpack, it kind of caught my attention, laying on the ground next to the backpack, or close, I could see what looked like from a distance as some shell casings. And when I saw that, I guess that's when it really sank in, like, this is real. Something has happened, or something is still happening, but it's quiet. Then I hear something behind me, and I turn around, and Andy McGill, our assistant principal, has come up behind me. He was still outside for bus duty. The elementary kids get off the bus a little later than the high school. So he was immediately behind me. He said, "Hey, Greg, what's going on?" I said, "We got a call of an active shooter in the high school wing. I haven't seen anybody yet, but look, there's a backpack that looks like shell casings. What do you think?" He said, "Yeah, it definitely does." So we just started walking down the hallway in that direction, kind of looking left to right, but nothing's happening. And as we got closer to the restroom, then we started to hear voices. And actually, we only heard one voice. Not knowing whose voice it was, turns out it was Logan's voice. But we heard voices, and we heard Logan saying something along the lines of, "It's okay. You haven't killed anybody. Just put it down. It's okay." That made it pretty obvious to us that there's a situation in there, and one student has a gun, another student doesn't. And kind of instinctively, we said, "Hey guys, we're coming in. Let's talk." And we both, put our hands up and walked around the corner. "Hey, we're going to come in and talk." And as we got in there, we saw Logan, and Logan was kind of laying there on the floor, but leaned up against the wall a little bit. Obviously, severely injured, and we couldn't see the other student. He was actually back in the stall of the restroom. He was at a place, or Logan was in a place, I guess, where Logan could see Eli, our shooter. Logan could see him, and Logan could see us. We walked in, and I think when Eli heard Andy's voice, Andy's also an assistant football coach and helps out with the wrestling team, has a great relationship with students, and that's something that we've stressed to people that we've talked to is, man, those relationships that we build with our students are so important. Next thing you hear out of Eli says, "I'm sorry, Coach," put the gun down, slid it underneath the stall wall. And so for the two of us, from that point on, we knew the situation was in control. I mean, there's a lot of chaos, but the gun is down. The gun has been pushed underneath the door. Actually, Eli laid down on the ground for us. So then it became, we've got Logan here, and he's hurt pretty bad. Andy said, "Greg, go get help. I've got this." And so I took off. I ran out of there. And as I think back, I feel terrible that I ran out of a restroom and left my good friend and assistant principal in a restroom with a shooter, a gun, and a severely injured student. Ran down to the office, ran into the elementary principal, told him, "We've got it under control. We've got a shooter. We've got a student that's hurt. It's Logan Cole." He said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "We got to call 911, get a squad here. There's got to be a deputy getting here soon. Meet them, bring them to the high school hallway boys' restroom, and we got to find the nurse." And we actually had a hard time finding the nurse that day. She had been in the elementary when the call went out, and somebody grabbed her and said, "Get in here." So as I was running back, I came across our athletic director, who is also an EMT. I said, "Jake, I need you. Come on. It's Logan. He's hurt." And he ran back with me. We got in there. By that time, another teacher had joined Andy with Logan. Jake jumped right in and helped apply pressure. Come to find out, Logan had been, like I said, Logan had been shot twice. When Andy and I first saw him, it was obvious that he had been wounded in the front. We couldn't tell that he had also been wounded in the back. Jake comes in to apply pressure. I went back out to the hallway, and by then the nurse and two secretaries were coming in, so I got them in, and by that time there's 5 or 6 people in the restroom, and I'm not needed in there. So I come out, and I remember noticing the door across the hall, the window was broken, and it looked like there were desks and tables in front of it, and I thought that was just from kids throwing desks and tables in front of it, and it was probably about 2 hours later that I found out that there were shots fired into those doors as students were in there. My next phone call was to Logan's parents. So, like I said, I've lived in the community a long time. My youngest daughter is best friends with Logan's little sister. We keep our 2 horses at their house. I had been at their house that morning to do chores. So I grabbed my cell phone, called Ryan Cole. He didn't answer. Called Julie Cole. She answered, and I said, Julie, it's Greg. Listen carefully. we've had a shooting at school. Logan's been shot. He's hurt. I need you to get here as quickly and safely as you can. And her only question is, Greg, is he okay? I said, I just talked to him. He was talking to me, but you need to get here as soon as you can. About that time, the first deputy showed up. It was 8 minutes between the first shot being fired and the first deputy being on the scene, which I think that's amazing. So the elementary principal brought him down. 2 minutes later, the squad shows up. So it took 10 minutes from the first shots being fired to the squad being there. About a minute after that, Ryan and Julie got there. I asked them later, I said, how did you get there so quickly? It felt like I hung up the phone and you pulled in. He said 2 things. One, they were loaded up, ready to go, because they were going to go watch his mock trial competition. So they were in the car. 2, they drove really fast. I think that helped. We said the squad gets there, and EMTs come in, and they did an amazing job. Very shortly after, Ryan and Julie get there. And in my mind, at that time, I was still thinking, somebody's probably going to tell me that's the wrong thing to do. You don't call parents that soon. You don't let parents get in the way of people who are trying to do the work. But I thought if it was my kid, I'd want to know as soon as possible. So Ryan and Julie were there. And actually, my next phone call was to this guy, to Mr. Hissong, our superintendent. He wasn't at school yet that day. He was actually sick. He was ill. And I called, and we had a very similar conversation.
I got better really quick.
Yeah. I said, Craig, listen up. I need to tell you what's happened. We've had a shooting at school. We've got a student that's hurt. It's Logan Cole. We've got the situation. It's controlled, but you should probably get here soon. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, you get to deal with the media, not me. And he kind of asked what has happened, and I filled him in real quick, and then he got there pretty quick. So a lot, at this point, more law enforcement's showing up. They get Logan loaded up, taken outside. The plan is to put him in a helicopter to fly him away. Well, it was January 20th, but it was kind of a dreary day, but it was foggy and misty and kind of mild as far as temperature goes. So they couldn't fly. So they ended up removing him just with the squad. And like I said, the squad got there 10 minutes after the first shots were fired, and by 10 minutes later, so a total 20 minutes later, Logan was on the road and on the way out of there. So, I think that quick response was amazing. One very, very fortunate thing for us, like I said, our athletic director is an EMT. He's on the fire department. He had his fire radio with him. The squad's not allowed to show up until after, as you guys know, until after the scene has been secured by law enforcement. Jake was able to say, I'm here. I'm in the restroom, we've got the shooter, we've got a victim, it's safe to come on back. So we saved precious minutes in that case. So moving on from there, Logan and his parents were able to leave in the squad, and we've got law enforcement there with Eli. And then that's about the time that I looked into a classroom and saw it was empty, and looked into another classroom and saw it was empty. And realized that our students were gone. They had gotten out of there the way they were supposed to. We had teachers that were coming back in the building that had left with students that were coming back in saying, all right, Greg, what can we do? What do we need to do next? What do we need to do now? And talking to law enforcement, and they said, they needed to check rooms. Just because I felt like the scene was secure doesn't mean the scene was secure. In my mind, there's no way we're ever going to have one shooter in the building. So the idea that there could be more than one hadn't crossed my mind. Once they decided the scene was secure, we decided to bring students back in and to take all the high school and middle school students to the high school gym. The teachers that were there, I said, anybody any teacher that went out with students, call them, let them know we need to come back into the high school gym. Getting 360 students back turned to be quite a challenge, especially when, like I said, our community is cornfields. Later on, getting a chance to watch some of our hallway and outdoor security cameras, I got to to watch my own daughter jump out of a classroom window. She was in the math class. The math teacher who called his wife, the elementary secretary, she was in there, actually with Andy's daughter too. To see her jump out the window and take off and run close to a mile through a muddy field, through a drainage ditch to get to a house. We had 360 students that did that evacuated. And I think, you know, in some cases it takes days of listening to students and listening to teachers and hearing their story to really put together that full picture. And that definitely took me a while to understand. One thing that I miscalculated that day was the trauma that our student body went through. It was traumatic for me, but like I said, Andy and I knew very quickly when the situation was under control. We walked in, we saw Logan, we heard Eli say, "I'm sorry, Coach," put the gun down, and from that point, we knew we had a lot to deal with, but the situation was under control. We had students running and hiding for 20, 30, 40 minutes, thinking every one of my classmates is still in that building. People are getting killed. I heard gunshot after gunshot after gunshot. As we've had 8 months to deal with this, dealing with that trauma with our students has been a really big challenge. So to get back to our story that day, so the students that are coming back in the building, we had them go to the high school gym. Law enforcement, with the help of our assistant principal, with Andy, they start going room to room. And you know, he could share a little bit about what he saw as he entered rooms, but they were dismissing students to come back to the high school gym. Students were in there. Once we had everybody in there, then a very, very challenging task was accountability. A lot of our teachers hadn't even taken attendance yet. We didn't know who was absent that day. So I look over and we've got, you know, like 3 or 4 secretaries and a couple teachers that said, what can we do? And then we said, we've got to figure out who's here and who's not. So I called all the teachers into the center of the gym and said, I need a list. I need a list of who is not with you right now. And so get paper, get pencil, whatever you need. If you need us to print out a roster, we can, but you know, so we made an announcement, told kids to sit with their homeroom teacher, and within about 5 minutes, we had all these lists to our secretaries. For about the next 45 minutes, they sat there in a circle on the floor of the high school gym, calling, texting, and like I said, it was maybe an hour after they started, one of them came up to me and said, "Greg, we know where everybody is. We know where everybody is except for 2. One's Logan and one's Eli, but we've got accountability on everybody else." I thought that was amazing. I thought it was going to take us 8 hours to figure out where all the kids were. Were there some kids that got rides home with somebody else's parent that day? Yeah, that's fine. We found out where they were. They didn't all come back to the school. Like Craig said, as kids are running through fields, they're making calls to parents. They're making calls to 911. We then decided, okay, we've got people we need to work on a reunification plan. We identified the site. We explained, I tried to keep the kids updated. About every 10 to 15 minutes, I'd get everybody's attention in the gym and tell them what's going on. One of the first updates, I said, you know, just to let you guys know what has happened without getting into lots of details. Obviously we had a shooting in the high school, and we have one student that was hurt. Logan Cole was hurt. I talked to him on the way out. He left here with his parents in the squad. I'll keep you updated. I found out later that there were some students that just assumed he got hurt going through a window. He got hurt evacuating. I didn't explain very well how Logan got hurt, but then other students that you know, knew a little bit more what happened. I had kids asking me if they could pray for Logan. I said, definitely. I sent Ryan a text and said, hey, I don't want to bother you, but if you ever get a chance, you know, here to give us an update, we've got kids praying. He called me right away and said, you know, thank you. Yes, he's stable, but it's critical. I mean, I don't think he said the word stable, but please pray for him. I said, all right. And before I said goodbye, he said, oh wait, also make sure you pray for Eli and his family. So I shared that with the students, and since I've got an audience, I'll say that is one thing that has been so inspiring to our community, is the way Logan Cole and his family have handled this situation. The forgiveness that they have offered up has been amazing. So We give the kids updates. We explain that we're gonna keep you here. We've got to get full accountability. We're gonna tell your parents to meet you at the park. Then we're gonna load up by bus. We're gonna start with the little ones first. We're gonna start with the kindergartners, work our way up to the seniors. We're gonna get you home as soon as we can. And we started doing that. By noon, everybody had made it to the park and been reunified with their parents and taken home. So that was kind of in a nutshell, or maybe a little more than a nutshell. That's kind of what happened at West Liberty-Salem on that day, on January 20th. I think Andy McGill, our assistant principal, is going to share a little bit about his experience that day, and maybe a little more specifically about how our students and teachers implemented Alice, and what we've done, what we've learned from it, and what we've done maybe to change things since.
Yeah, I actually have to use notes because there's a lot I have to cover here. So I will be as quick as I can because I believe most of you want to hear this guy, not me. So let me get going here. Also, Greg and I will be available for photos afterwards since we wore matching outfits today. That was not planned, but I think we pulled it off just about as well as you can without knowing what the other person's going to wear. So. Clearly, Craig did not get the memo that we were going to go with khaki and some type of a blue check shirt today, but I appreciate Logan participating as well. Just want to touch a little bit. I'm very similar to what Greg has talked about. Same type of situation for myself as well. I want to jump right into the Alice portion if I can, especially with how the kids responded, how the staff responded. We had, like Craig had mentioned, about 4 years ago, the first formal training at West Liberty-Salem Schools for Alice. I was one of those districts 6 years ago that he is talking about when it was first kind of coming on the scene in our area. I was an administrator at another building. We were one of the first ones in our area that had decided to jump on board with Alice. And actually at the time, our elementary principal and the dean of students from West Liberty came over to our district and got to participate with that. We invited administrators from other districts to come and take a look at it, see what we were doing at our school. So I had gone through that training as well. I know that our elementary principal and our former dean of students had some experience with that. They had not yet gone full implementation like we had, and then it was a couple years later when West Liberty-Salem Schools did it. I was excited about it because all my kids had gone there and do go there. So for me, I knew it was a great thing, something you hope you never have to implement, but the fact that the kids are empowered to do so and the staff's empowered to do so is what's critically important. So I was 100% on board when I found out they were going to be implementing that training. Our former assistant principal at West Liberty-Salem Schools goes by the name of Paul Holbein. He kind of took charge of that 4 years ago, got that ball rolling, and you know, a lot can be said about Paul and how he helped get that implemented at our district. The irony in the whole situation is this past 2 summers ago now, summer of 2016, as we're revamping our safety plans, I had actually met with our local Alice instructor, and I said, listen, we want to re-up, we want to get retrained, we've got a lot of staff turnover the past few years. Can we please just wait until this construction project is over, because the building it's just in disarray, and I recommend never to have an incident while you have a construction project. It just doesn't really flow too well. So, in fact, if you can avoid a construction project altogether, I would recommend that. I also would be willing to recommend a construction company not to go with, but I'm going to go off the record on that as well. That's when I know Mike is on, just in case. I don't want to get in trouble for that one. So we had actually planned for this August of this year, because we knew we were going to be done this summer. We're not, but we knew we were going to be done this summer, and we were going to re-up all of our training. So, you know, that's kind of the irony of the whole situation is we had everything in the books, already marked in the calendar for this to happen for our staff, and then obviously January 20th rolls around, and here we are ready to roll it out, and our staff. I can't speak enough. I'm an emotional guy. Sorry about that. You know, for Greg and I, and Craig as well, you got kids. And I can't speak enough about the teachers and what they did for my kids. So that's huge. That's huge to me. So when I get emotional about this, it's not about what he did, what I did. It's about what the people in the building did for our kids. And that to me is the number one thing that I could harp on that all day long about Alice, is that it empowers people to do something. And that's what happened on that day. So let me move on about that. And the thing about Alice is this, is a lot of people look at Alice and they see that alert, that lockdown, the inform, the counter, the evacuate. And you look at it as step by step, and you're like, well, I see the steps in that, but it's so fluid. And that's the one thing we talk about now, is just the fluidity of Alice in itself. Is if I were to be able to show you the timeline of what had happened in our event, you're going to see that at different points, whether it's the alert, the lockdown, the inform, the counter, the evacuate, it's all happening at the exact same time. And that was huge for us in our building. So we had kids leaving. We had staff that obviously locked down, barricaded. And I can speak to that as Greg and I, again, we had the fortune of knowing confidently the situation under control, but obviously the police officers, they need to go through room by room. We couldn't get in to the rooms. I mean, it was wonderful. And I remember our trainer, he was one of the early ones on the scene as well. He just said, this is beautiful. This is exactly what it's supposed to be. And they are blasting through desks and tables, shoving stuff out of the way just to make sure a room's clear. And you see windows that have been kicked out, broke open, knocked open, everything. And everybody is gone. He's like, this is great. This is great. We had one room in there in the high school wing that did not evacuate. He opted not to because his window had been shot out. And so he felt there was a clear line of sight to his egress windows. He made the right decision. And his kids were ready to go. I mean, the room was barricaded and they were ready to roll. So when we were able to push through that, we were able to tell them, hey, we're coming in, that kind of, just make sure everybody has their hands up, things like that. And so we were able to go through that process with them. And it was true. His classroom windows was a direct line of sight from his door window. It was the best decision he could have made. And he was empowered to do so. We worked through the rest of the building, and I'll never forget this, in the shop room. This is hilarious. We get to the shop room, and of course the shop room's got all sorts of tools. And those kids, they were armed. I mean, man, they were armed. You had files, screwdrivers, and of course, we walk around, hey, go ahead and set them down, because the officers have their weapons, please put them down. And I'm like, okay, hey, look, we're ready to go. An officer's going to escort you guys to the gym. And I had a couple kids that, they gathered up their books, their files. I was like, you're going to have to leave the file on the table. You can't arm yourself through the hallway. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry. They're ready to go. They were empowered to do so, and they felt confident to do so. And that is because the teachers reviewed with them, in the previous years, hey, if something ever were to happen, this is what we need to do. And so they review through those things. Some of the things that we have made changes to is the events. A lot of times you think the event begins when the announcement is made. And that for us is how we've communicated out. The event begins when the shot is fired, because the kids are the ones, and the adults in that area are the ones that really start the implementation process of Alice. It's not when the announcement comes on. So that's the kind of mindset that we've switched in our own heads as to when the event actually starts. So that's where we're at with that. Staff, we've enabled our staff to be able to make all calls, make announcements from their own phones in their classrooms. We have it printed out right there. It's taped to everybody's phone, and if a kid needs to do it, a kid can do it. And we have classroom information sheets that tells them exactly how they can make an all call to a building. You think, do I really want a kid to be able to get on the horn and make an all call? They're going to do something stupid at some point in time. Oh yeah, maybe so, but deal with it when it happens. Being clear on reunification. In our safety plan, we have a reunification site. We knew where we wanted to go, but sometimes when things get rolling, you get a lot of chiefs get going, and there's not enough Indians, and so one chief's making a decision, another chief's making a decision, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not being critical. It's it's when there's a little bit of a breakdown of communication with some of those things. So I think we had to make 4 all calls to say, okay, we know we told you here, but it's going to be here. Well, we told you here, but now we're going to be here. One of those type of things. And so in the end, it worked out wonderfully and beautifully, and we were able to get everybody where we were. So we want to make sure we're a little bit more clear on that and doing that. We now are going to do annual ALICE refreshers. This year we had a full-blown session for any staff that had not been formally trained and anyone who wanted to continue to do it. Again, for everybody else, we had a refresher. One of the things I requested is I don't need a scenario where a gun's getting shot off. They know what it sounds like. They don't need it. And we weren't ready for it. Our door lock systems, for, again, a construction project. Some of the door locks didn't even work. Some of the key cylinders were in the process of being changed. I mean, literally, that day, locks were being changed out, so the teachers didn't even have their new key yet because the new cylinder hadn't even been put in. And so it's just, one of those type of worst case scenarios, but that's all worked now. We found out the difference in what we deem as an egress window and what is actually construction grade egress window, which is not an egress window. Just an FYI for everybody. If you're in a school building and you are getting an egress window, make sure that it's a grade that has a piano hinge that can freely open all the way. Don't let them convince you that a factory grade egress is an egress, because kids can't get out of it, not without breaking it. So just keep that in mind. And I would encourage you to retrofit at least one window in your buildings in each room with a piano hinge so that it opens freely. Just mark it. That's what we've done. We've marked it as emergency egress window. All it is it's a pop of the lock and it's open. It just lightly pushes open and it opens all the way now. So now it's just one of those comfort things for our kids. We have security films on our windows now. That is, it's ballistic resistant, meaning that it won't shatter. Obviously, bullets will still come through. It's that 3M film. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, but it takes an awful lot to get through it. So we've done that. We fit our classroom windows with the doors with that, and also on the classroom windows themselves. We also have a school resource officer now. We did not have one before. It was Greg, was our school resource officer. So we have a young man that is doing that now. He's fantastic. He's fitting in very well, and we're excited for him. And we also have invested in the night lock door barricade system as well. And that is in the process of being installed throughout the school building. Afterwards, we have a meeting with the Homeland Security and just talk with them, the FBI. A lot of people show up. You don't expect to be in your school building. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know. When you live in Mayberry, which is where we live, it's not often you have Homeland Security and the FBI there, but they show up, and that was, I don't know, it's kind of interesting for that. But the overall, just the overall outcome, we successfully implemented ALICE. We did it well. I'm not going to say perfect, because there's always room for growth. But for all intents and purposes, our staff executed it well, our students executed it well, and even we were complimented by the Department of Homeland Security on just the execution of ALICE training. Don't really have a whole lot. I know that was a little longer than I anticipated, but the kids did great. Kids did great. Can't stress that again. And I'm excited for you to hear this guy, because he's got a cool story, and he's a great human. I think Craig's going to come back up here real quick, and then Logan will get going.
I have the best staff in the world, if you haven't noticed yet. So very blessed to have these guys. They have made things great for us, and then all of our staff, and the way they implemented things on that day, and the way they do things on a daily basis, we couldn't be blessed with better folks. The thing I wanted to share with you guys is just a little bit, and I'm not sure how much of this will apply to all of you directly, but obviously after the crisis happens, there's still a lot of work to do. And I talked with Lisa. She actually called me the day this happened, And I had no idea who Lisa was. She said, hey, I worked with my husband, and we kind of created Alice, and she kind of went through all that. I didn't know any of those details, but it sure was nice to get a call from her that day. And she started talking to me about some different things and giving me some thoughts, and I reached out to some other neighboring districts, because after like something like this happens, you're trying to figure out, how am I going to handle the press? How are we going to deal with parents who are worried? And then how are we going to get things back to a position where we can bring the kids back into this building? Everybody was on edge. And so just give you a little timeline. On Friday, which is when this incident occurred on the 20th, the first thing that happened, obviously, is the school became a crime zone. So everybody was gone. We got everybody home. We felt good about that. Big thing was communicating with parents what the situation was. But all the kids' cars are still at the school. They couldn't take them away. They were still in a crime scene area. All their cell phones, if they didn't have them, were still on their desks. All these things that, purses, you name it, stuff was there. Our staff still couldn't even get to their items because all of it was considered a crime scene. So, we worked, to get and be able to get those folks back to those things. And actually the way it turned out is a bulk of that happened the next morning. But in order for that to happen the next morning, you can't just let people back into the building unless it's kind of cleaned up. Obviously, we knew what happened, but we didn't want people to walk back into the building and see a building that looked like a crime scene. And this is something to think about, because I didn't know how this was going to work out. But obviously on that night, we had emergency board meetings. We did lots of things. I'm not going to go into all that detail right now with you. But one of the things was cleaning up the crime scene. It seems like such a simple thing that you would know how to do that or what to do. But after BCI and FBI left and everybody had their investigations done, they closed the door. And it's these guys right here who are still standing there trying to figure out, okay, now what do we do? And we knew that we wanted to make sure that we had the place cleaned up. So we had our staff working, our maintenance staff and crews, some of the construction crews. That was one nice thing they did do for us. Started cleaning up some of the windows and trying to clean the area up, remove some of the doors that were shot out. Because we knew that in order to let the kids back in, we were going to have them be able to come down to rooms, because stuff was scattered everywhere. It wasn't all neat in piles. Desks were overturned. So we knew we had to get that put back together to some degree, which we did. We actually spent quite a bit of the evening that night, I'd say around 8 o'clock or so, going around to rooms and trying to straighten up desks and get things somewhat organized. We never put things back where they were supposed to be, but we wanted when the kids walked back in that building with their parents, we didn't want to walk into a chaos. So we had it somewhat cleaned up. We had the doors removed, and then last but not least, we still had the crime scene. We had blood in a restroom. That was a pretty strong reminder that we just had a serious incident. So I would never recommend this, but if you have an opportunity to talk with an administrator or somebody back in the school district to develop a plan of who's going to clean that up or how that's going to work, it actually ended up being the school treasurer, myself, and Andy and Greg. We cleaned up the crime scene. And for us, that was pretty therapeutic. And I don't know why, but for us, it felt like we were taking care of a student who we knew was in a critical shape. And we cleaned that up that night. We were in there with paper towels and bleach and took care of it. But that's not necessarily a good place to put a school administrator. So if you have a situation like that happens, make sure that you have some thoughts about how to carry those things out. That's something that we don't talk about a lot afterwards. We do the Alice part, but how do you implement things? Once we got through that night, we had the parents come back in the next day. Fortunately, it was a bright, sunny morning. And I remember Greg talking about that. It was sunny that day. Kids walked back in the building. It felt good. It was a pretty day for January in Ohio. And so we walked back in. We gave them an hour to get their stuff, and they moved back out. I did some more press meetings with the press. One thing that's very important to think about is how you're going to meet the press, and make sure that you are very proactive in that approach. Keep them off your property. We did not want that to become a situation where they were sensationalizing it more than what was necessary. And so that's another thing to think about. Communication with families, we used our one-call system a lot, and it really came in handy for us. That also is an email system and a text system, and it did a nice job of just being able to keep them up to date with what was going on and how we were going to carry things out. After that, we set up some counseling sessions for the kids and families. We made sure that those were ready to go on Saturday and Sunday, and our counselors did a great job of organizing that, bringing in our community resources for mental health, because we knew we had a lot of people out there who were scared and concerned, and we knew we had to somehow get in front of this if we were ever going to get school started back up. We also brought our staff in on Saturday. Kind of did one of those nice little round chair type meetings where you talk about your feelings that everybody loves. Yeah. It was very long and grueling. Not everybody did love it, but I think it was a good thing because it started the process of us at least sharing. The whole staff was back in the room, and we were on site, and that was a good thing. We were able to work through a lot of what was happening, and that kind of was our Saturday. Sunday, there was still some community meetings and for folks at local churches to go get help with clergy and counselors and that type of thing. So that was for staff, it was for students and parents who were around. Monday, we took the day off. We basically brought the staff in, and that was our day to plan on how we were going to bring the kids back. At some point in all of this, we had decided to go ahead and hold a middle school girls basketball game that night. That was our next school event that was going to occur. That was Monday night. And at some point we decided, let's have an open house with that game so we can bring the whole community back in. And so we were fixing and had everything basically ready to go so that we could have that open house that night. And that turned out to be one of the biggest advantages that we had in the process of getting school back open again. Because when we did that, the community was able to come in with their kids, and they were all able to see that school was still school. It wasn't this scary place where gunshots were happening. And so I heard just a ton of compliments that night, and that event worked out so well that would be one thing I would encourage everybody to do, is to make sure you bring everybody back in and allow them the opportunity to come back into the building. That, I think, really helped us successfully bring students back in. Then on Tuesday, we had a 1-hour delay, and we had a real kind of altered schedule, I guess I would say, where basically we allowed our first period, which is when this event occurred in the morning, to have pretty much a double period where they could sit with the students, talk about it. They had been basically instructed on how to approach that with the kids, because not every teacher obviously is a counselor, but they were able to talk with the students, work through that process, and that again, it worked very well, and I think overall it helped to get the school day started off right. And as the day went on, then it got more back into regular school business. But those are things that we did in order to try and get things going, and it's something that we I think is a piece of this that we should focus on to some degree, is how do you get things back and rolling again. I think we got lucky on several of those things because we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants a little bit on how we were going to go about it. But that's something that is a very good conversation to have, especially if you have access to school administrators in your community or in your school districts to do that with. I'll check over my notes here and just make sure I'm not leaving anything out.
What was our attendance rate that first day back?
I'm sorry?
Our attendance rate that first day back?
Oh, yeah. Our attendance rate that first day back, everybody was thinking, oh, we'll never get any kids back in here. Our attendance rate that day was 97.5%, which on a typical average, it's around 95%. So we had better attendance on that Tuesday than we did on a typical day of school, which I thought was pretty amazing, the fact that we were able to get that type of response back from parents. And again, I think it was because we were able to reach out and build some trust with them that we were going to continue to take care of their kids. I think with that, I'm going to turn this over to Logan. Yeah, I think it's going to be great to have an opportunity for Logan to share what happened from his perspective, and obviously get to hear from a successful situation that could have ended much worse, but we're so happy to have him here. Logan is also our homecoming king. You might want to give them a round of applause for that. We got that last Friday night. We had our homecoming football game and stuff, and Logan, of course, was voted in king. But it's been quite a whirlwind of a year for us and for Logan, and appreciate your thoughts on today. Welcome, Logan.
Well, as Mr. Hassan kind of said, I'm just going to give my perspective of this. It might get a little bit repetitive, but this is how my view was. So first, I'm going to start with the morning of January 20th. The day was a little different, as you've heard that. I mean, I had a mock trial competition, and I had spent months preparing with my team to go to this competition, which was about 45 minutes drive away. We were going to ride the bus. And so I wasn't in the classroom that I was supposed to be. I was in my advisor's classroom getting ready to leave. And as I believe Mr. Johnson said, I went into the bathroom to check my hair because I was all dressed up with a nice suit and tie, and I wanted to make sure I looked nice. And when I walked in there he was. I turned to my left, and instantly I saw him, Eli. I didn't know it was Eli at the time because he was wearing a mask. And at first I really didn't know what was going on. The second I saw him, he shot me, and it was the weirdest feeling. I didn't like my last thought was that I just got shot by a gun. Like when you're in school, I mean, you don't think that somebody brought a gun there. I mean, it's not allowed. It's just the last thing on your mind. And so, I mean, I don't know exactly when I figured out that I had been shot, but that hit me pretty hard when I did. And so as I was turning away, he shot me right here in my chest, and it entered and then exited on the side of my I believe it's pectoral muscle right here. And then as I was spinning around from that shot, I got shot again in the back. And then I fell on the ground, and one of my more vivid memories of this is my teeth hitting the concrete floor of the bathroom and breaking my front teeth. And that was, I don't know, it was weird. It was almost felt like that was more painful than the gunshots, because it was like, I don't know, it just stuck out to me when I put my tongue forward that there was no teeth there. It was the weirdest thing. And but like after this, my memory gets pretty spotty, but I remember not seeing him in the bathroom, and that's when he went out to the outside, and as you heard, the shot at the doors. And so I remember getting up and trying to get to that back stall because I knew that he wasn't in the bathroom. I tried to get as far away from him as I could, and I did not succeed in that. I got up and stumbled down, and that's pretty much the position I was in until Mr. Johnson and Mr. McGill came in and took care of the situation. But I do remember talking to him and telling him, you don't have to do this. You don't have to kill anybody, and you haven't killed anybody yet. And I find that pretty amazing that I said that, because I knew that he had left the bathroom with the gun. And I don't really know exactly where it came from, me saying that you haven't killed anybody yet. But not long after I talked to him, I remember Mr. Johnson and Mr. McGill coming into the bathroom, and I remember him sliding the gun under the stall, and the Eli laying down. And after he was out of the room, the school nurse, I remember, came in, and like you said, the athletic director, Jake Vitt, who I've become a pretty good friend of since then, came into there and started tending to my wounds. And I remember them asking me questions, simple questions like, what is your name, and things like that, just to kind of keep me awake. I remember them telling me, stay awake. And I also remember, I believe she's another employee at the school, she was praying for me. And that really, really meant a lot to me, because I've grown up in church, and that's been a big part of my life. And just to hear her the whole time praying, God, please save this child, save him. That really, really meant a lot to me. As the first responders arrived, that's right around when my parents came in, and that was really hard. I remember seeing my dad and my mom, and I just telling my dad, I love you, Dad. And he asked, who did this, Logan? I said, it was Eli Cerna, Dad, but that really doesn't matter. And I don't know really where that came from, but so I remember being lifted up onto a stretcher and out to the ambulance. And I remember going out to the ambulance and there a few people in there with me and sitting there. And I had learned later that we didn't leave because they were trying to figure out if they could care flight me out, and because of the fog, they couldn't. So I remember pretty well the ride up to our nearest hospital, about 10-15 minutes away, and getting there. And this is kind of a funny story. When I was there, I was in the room with just a bunch of people around me. I was obviously kind of disoriented. I was kind of out of it. But I do remember one of the doctors telling me, "Okay, Logan, you're gonna go to sleep now." And it was the weirdest thing, because I started feeling my eyes close, but I could still like hear everything and feel everything. And I was so scared, because I was worried they would start doing something to me when I was, and not know that I could like still hear and feel everything like that. And so like I remember trying so hard to like shake my foot, anything I could do to tell them that I'm still awake. But not too long after that, I don't really remember anything else. I think it either kicked in or they figured out, hey, he's still kind of awake. But so I woke up in ICU in Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, and at that point I had a neck brace on. And I remember at first I couldn't talk because I had a tube up my throat, and I remember my parents telling me that I would try to communicate with them, but I couldn't talk, so it was the hardest thing to figure out what I was trying to say. And they said that they figured it out after a bunch of guessing, that I was trying to ask, I have no memory of this, but I was trying to ask, are my friends okay? Like that's what I was trying to figure out. And and then I would fall asleep and then kind of wake back up and come to, and then try to communicate the exact same thing, because I didn't remember what they had told me beforehand. But in the hospital, there were obviously many health concerns. Like I said, a shot came in here, exited, and then pretty much in my upper spine, lower neck is where the second shot came in, and that did pretty large damage to my spine. And none of those pellets, the bird shot, none of that left my body. When it came in through the chest, it had an exit wound, but all those pellets were still inside my body. And shotguns are pretty, the doctor explained it, they're pretty dirty weapons. Like the bullets are porous and they move very slowly through the air, relatively to other bullets, that they pick up bacteria and things like that. And so that led to a very big worry that I would get an infection, because in either of my wounds, and with considering my health when I was in the hospital, that an infection was the last thing I needed. And so we were worried about infection, and then my spine was heavily damaged. It was chipped and fragmented in some parts, and there were multiple pellets lodged into my spine, and there were 2 pellets in my spinal canal, and that was very worrying for all the doctors and obviously my parents and my family, because if there's a leak of your spinal fluid or anything like that, that can cause major damage. And so that's why I had to wear a neck brace for a really long time. I had to wear a neck brace for 3 months, which was really hard. I'll get to that a little bit later. But and also from the shots, we don't know exactly where it came from, but one of the pellets got into one of my arteries, and it flowed and it went into my heart. And that was not good, with having a foreign body in my heart. So I had to get a heart catheterization, and they ended up blowing, I'm pretty sure it was blowing air at the pellet, and it got lodged into a part of my lung. And that was really, that was very relieving to hear, because you obviously don't want a piece of metal going around in your heart wherever you are. So that was good. But so my long-term recovery has gone really well. As I said, the neck brace, I had to wear it for 3 months, 24 hours a day, and that was really rough, because I've played soccer all my life. I'm a pretty athletic person. I like playing with my friends and stuff like that, and not being able to, my neck was stuck in this position for 3 months, like I couldn't move it or anything like that, and that I really struggled with that. Also, when I left the hospital, which, by the way, I was in the hospital for 15 days total, and when I left, I had wound vacs on both of my wounds, and that's pretty much to stimulate the healing process. It's something they give you, and once a week I would have to go back to Columbus to get the wound vacs changed, and that was really painful, because just imagine, the wounds that I had, and those wound vacs are very sticky. The vacuum needs to stay in, so what they use to keep it on is a very sticky substance, and so when it was pretty much like pulling a very large Band-Aid off of both the wounds every time they would change it once a week, and that was really hard too. And then after about 4 weeks of
of being home, I got my chest wound back off. And then a couple weeks later, I got my back wound back off. And then after that, it was just, it was daily dressing changes that my parents would have to do. And I remember I moved up to my sister's room because I slept in the basement. And so to be closer to my parents' room so they could help me, I moved to my younger sister's room. So every night they would come in and they would have to lay me down on the bed. And then since I wasn't allowed to move my neck, they would take the brace off and they'd have to hold my neck in position. And then they'd have to kind of like turn me and then change the dressings on each of my wounds every single night. And obviously that hurt pretty bad too. So I had to push through that, which was hard. And after about 2 months, my wounds and they are mostly scarred over now. So the healing process of my wounds has done phenomenal. I'm very thankful for that. But currently I have they don't know for sure because whenever they scan it, there are just so many, but I have about 130 birdshot pellets on my body right now. And since then, about 15 have come out. And what's something very interesting I found that the doctor said is that those pellets, the ones that are closer to the skin, they push their way out as time goes on. So I've actually had one that I've kind of pulled off of my skin from where the body has just pushed it out, which I find amazing what our body can do. But what those lead pellets do is they leak out lead into the body, and so one worry we have is lead poisoning, and because that's all getting into my blood, and that's very unhealthy. And so when I was in the hospital, my lead levels peaked at 43, and to compare, the average person's levels are 0 to 4, and so we, after much prayer, and thankfully as time has gone on, they've dropped and they're now at 30. The last time we tested it, and I mean, that's amazing because that's one of the biggest worries for my long-term health is because high lead levels, they can cause organ failure at high levels and things like that. So we were very thankful for that. But one thing that's really helped my recovery mentally is the community response. It has just been phenomenal. The way everybody has acted toward me and everybody at the school. I mean, because I'm not the only victim in this situation. There were, I believe Mr. McGill elaborated on, there are many people in the school who are mentally traumatized from that. I mean, including me and many other students. And so we've done many events, and something that's kind of come up is Tiger Strong, is hashtag Tiger Strong, which has been kind of a phrase we've all jumped behind in this situation. And one thing, well, for me, we started a GoFundMe page because people wanted to know how they can help me out, and that's another example of the community. Just they want to know where they can donate, what they can do, and so from a couple local restaurants, they did fundraisers and they raised close to $30,000 and donated it to my family, and then other things like the GoFundMe ended up about $100,000 total were raised for me and my family. And in the beginning of the process, when my parents first saw how much money people were willing to donate, we decided that what we wanted to do with that money. And so we decided that we would donate part of it back to the community and the school, and then part of it back to the Cerna family. And we decided that the way we would give back to the Cerna family is to help a college scholarship for Eli's sister, who is, I believe, a sophomore this year, or a junior. And that's something we decided on from close to day one, really. And then something that has come out of this that's amazing is we ended up donating $22,000 of that money raised for me to kickstart funding for a field house at our school. It's going to be called the Tiger Strong Field House. And it's been a need for our school and our community because having 12 grades of students in one building, it's hard to, with all the basketball teams out of season teams that need gym courts, everything was getting too packed. So we decided to make this Tiger Strong Field House, which is going to be another building outside of our school that will have an extra practice gym. We'll have locker rooms. We'll have bathrooms outside the school. And of the $850,000 that we need to raise for that, we've raised around $400,000, which has just been amazing. And I can't wait to see how that turns out. And also in that field house, we will have an honor room for January 20th. And it's just going to have plaques that maybe have drawings from students that were given to me and just it'll show how the community worked together to make that incident as, I guess, good as it could have been. And Some other things, the public response that's happened since then is I've been recognized by the Secret Service, who let me meet Vice President Mike Pence, which was amazing, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I've been recognized by the FBI, and I was given a tour of the Cincinnati FBI headquarters. And the Army came to the school in front of the whole high school student body and presented me with an award. I was recognized by the City of Urbana Sheriff's Department. And just many things like that were really, really helpful in my recovery. And to kind of conclude with my recovery is also how the school has helped my recovery with the administration. The first time I went back to the school, it was on the evening of one of our high school basketball games. And we went early, and Mr. McGill brought my family and I back to the bathroom where it happened. And that was my first time going back to the school, and obviously my first time going back into the bathroom, and that was really hard. But it was really helpful in my recovery to see what happened and see the results of what happened, and for him to explain exactly what happened to me. Another thing that helped was how my teachers allowed me to change my schedule up. So I was obviously still weak, and my back had many problems. And so when I started slowly going back to school, my teachers would allow me to switch classes up, and they were fine with me missing classes to get half days in instead of full days. And that really helped with me, because the first week or two of half days I did, I was just so tired by the end of the day. There was no way I'd be able to do full days. And also something that was just kind of minor but really helped is Mr. Johnson got me a chair. Mr. Johnson and Mr. McGill got me a chair to sit in. And the school chairs aren't exactly the most comfortable things to sit in, so they gave me one of those nice rolling office chairs that I could go around in. And that really helped with my back and things like that when I was there. But something that kind of connects into that is Mr. Johnson. Well, when I first came back to school, I was worried that we didn't think that it was I was the target of that situation, but I mean, we were very worried about that still, and we didn't know if something else would happen. And so Mr. Johnson, for the first couple of weeks, he would come to my class when my class was over 7 times a day and come and walk with me to my next class. And that was really, really helpful for me, just to have an adult there walking with me that I knew, that I trusted. That was extremely helpful. And I mean, really, all the students of our school and the whole community just backed me. When I would walk on the hallway, I bet over half the people that walked by me would say, "Hey, Logan, how you doing?" and stuff like that. And although that it kind of got, I wouldn't say old after a while, I really, really appreciated it. I mean, it was so cool to think that everybody was so behind me and how I was doing. And the one last thing that happened was I was recognized by the school board at a basketball game. They had me walk out in front of everybody, and it was so many people there, because it was the student section had kind of done they made a Coles pack. It was like Coles pack, like my last name Cole, and then pack for the student section. They all were wearing T-shirts, and it was really cool because all my friends were there. And then I went out in front of everybody, and I was presented with an award. So really, just to conclude, I think that one of the biggest things that helped in my recovery was how our school helped me when I came back, and all these reasons. So thank you to Alice for having me here, and that's...
Thank you again. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and share our story with you. If you have any questions, we certainly would be welcome to take those. I'm not sure where we're at on time, but if you see us around here yet this afternoon, feel free to come up and talk with us.
Wow, I think that pretty much sums that up. I'm sure everybody has chills. That was incredible. That's the wonderful part about this job, is the people they are around, the heroes. And when you listen to those heroes' stories, how it's never about them. The heroic acts that they do, the lives that they save, but they never want to talk about that. Every time I hear those stories, it's just incredible.